Be approved. Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously, thank you. Okay, Henry, how is Duke Energy going to treat us on these plugs?
They've been treating us pretty well so
Good,
far.
good.
So, the action item before you is just another example of our continued partnership with Duke Energy under their Park and Plug program. If you recall, several months ago, I came before you, and the partnership at that time was Duke Energy, under the same Park and Plug program, reimbursed PSTA for the costs of the 2 depot chargers and their installation for our 2 all-electric buses. So under that agreement, they basically will operate and maintain and repair if needed for the next 5 years. This particular one's still under the Park and Plug program, but this is a different partnership, which is Duke Energy approached us, and we've said we're interested is that they would like to install 6 what they call DC fast chargers, and what those are for are automobiles, whether they be all electric like the Volt, or those particular hybrid vehicles that are both. Remember, Commissioner Barrow, you had a vehicle that was both.
Yes.
So, under this agreement, Duke Energy would pay for, install, and maintain over a course of 3 years the installation of these 6 chargers. Place that they'll be installed on our campus here is to be determined. We're going to look at that and make sure that those get installed in a place where obviously access to utilities currently. But we're excited about that. I know we have several employees that either have electric vehicles or thinking about buying it. And this is really to solve that question, which is if I drive all the way here, how could I recharge? Also, those folks that do have business here at PSTA, whether meetings or visiting us, that they could charge their vehicle as well. And that would be at no cost, at least for the initial phase until we start collecting some data. So I answer any questions, but the action item again is to recommend approval of a 3-year agreement with Duke Energy to own, maintain, and support the electric vehicle charging equipment under their Park and Plug.
Okay, any questions?
I have.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
the initial beginning of this till we won't be charged, is that correct? Through Duke Energy for these 6, the charging mechanism?
We will not be charged for the
Okay,
physical
and
equipment.
then how long does that last?
3 years.
3 years,
After
okay.
3 years,
Okay.
we will meet with Duke, and there's really 2 choices, which is they could continue the partnership, or they could basically turn over the equipment to us, transfer its title at no cost, and then we would just keep it. Or the possibility exists that the program may not have been successful, so it would just terminate.
Okay, Mr. Schulman.
Now, it's no cost to us, but is Duke charging for the actual charging service, or is that free to users who are plugged in?
The cost of the electricity PSTA will incur. However, obviously, if these become very successful, the equipment does have the ability to turn on paying for it, whether it be by credit card or some other mechanism. So we don't believe, at least to start, that we will be incurring that much in electricity costs. Also, the cost for electricity for us, our blended rate, is about 8.9 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's not a significant amount of cost for electricity.
Okay, but PSTA will be absorbing that cost for electricity?
At least initially, yes.
Okay, do we know about how much one of these average electric vehicles will take as far as kilowatts to charge?
I can answer that question. Less than $1 a month. Okay, it's almost nothing.
Okay.
On my homeowner, which was only a 110 line, I didn't pay to have the 220 line installed. It didn't even move the needle on my monthly bill. So it's very, very little. Is that all your questions?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? Vince, go ahead.
Well, I just had a comment. I mean, I researched this a bit, and I saw it was like $2 for a smaller vehicle, it could be up to $9 for a Tesla because they take longer to charge. This is what I came up with, so.
Commissioner Bennett, any questions?
No, I have none. If Duke Power's gonna give us something free, we'll take it.
Yeah.
I have an electric bike.
Oh. Cool, cool.
I mean, it's cool. electric bike.
The one thing that we had to have in order to unlock the charging plug from the case is you have to have a what amounts to a card that's free that you get from the charging entity. So if some people don't have that, is there a way to do that in another methodology, or we're going to assume that anybody's driving an electric vehicle already has the card to unlock it?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the exact type of charger. I know under this particular program, the idea is that it's open access at least to start. So
Yeah.
I don't believe that there would be a card. Again, if PSTA would start charging for this service or the
Yeah.
electricity, then
Yeah.
debit card, credit card.
Yeah,
would
no,
be
that
the-
part is free, but you have to have, they must do a little research to make sure that you're legit, that you can unlock the
Right.
charging wire from the utensil, the pole.
We do, if this is approved, then we will definitely have meetings with Duke. The point is that it's easy to use, that if you just come here, you could just plug in. There wouldn't be, our hope would be that there wouldn't be any type of extra layer of access needed.
Yeah,
But
I
if
don't-
there is.
I don't think anybody that owns a hybrid or electric car goes anywhere without that cord.
Right. No, not the cord. You don't need the cord. What you have to have is it's like a card. You just hold it up against the pole, and that releases the wire so you can get the plug to plug it into your car. That's all. It's just, but that you have to get from some central source. You call an 800 number and they send it to you. That's all.
You're talking about your personal car?
Yeah.
I have not had that problem at all. I have a cord on my car, I can plug it anywhere in the world.
Yeah, okay.
Just into a one.
That may work in that case, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point, and I will certainly
Yeah.
make sure that we ask that question.
Okay. Any other questions? Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the Duke Power agreement as presented by Henry.
Second?
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody? Okay. Passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. Okay, and can you give us a rundown on the electric bus situation too, Henry, please?
Sure. So in addition to the action item, which I'll get back to in just one second, after that, or before you vote on that, I'm going to show you the electric bus in action through an analytical tool. We showed it to the track committee last night, and Commissioner Schulman saw it, so this will be kind of a repeat for him.
I've seen it twice.
You'll see, you've already seen it. So the action item before you, this is a similar action item that I brought before you in April of 2018, and this has to do with our recent successes, I should say the planning department's recent successes with applying and being awarded low-no grant funds through the Federal Transit Administration. Low-no program is designed to provide agencies like PSTA the ability to purchase zero-emission vehicles and the infrastructure that goes along with them. The low part is other alternative fuels that may be low emission but not necessarily zero emission. So much like the previous action item, in 2018, PSTA applied for a second low-no grant and once again was notified that we were successful in being awarded another $1 million. So the $1 million from this combined with the $1 million from previous is a total of $2 million that PSTA will be receiving under the low-no program. What we will use this funding for, just like the last action item, is to purchase another two 35-foot BYD electric buses. So combined with these two awards, we would purchase a total of four more 35-foot electric buses, and that would bring our fleet count to a total of six all-electric buses. So while you're reviewing the action item, if I can take a few minutes, I'd like to show you a monitoring tool that not a lot of people get to see, but it's one of the analytical tools that PSTA uses to keep up on and track the performance of its all-electric buses. So this is real time. This is bus number 18110, and it is currently in service right now down there on the circulator in St. Petersburg, otherwise known as our looper or e-looper service. So there's 22 GPS satellites trained in on these buses collecting data. This is a very in-depth analytical tool, so there's a lot that I could show you, just don't have the time, but some of the high points is, again, I mentioned real time, and you can see exactly what the bus is doing, whether it's at a layover, which it is now, whether it's driving, or whether it's recovering. One of the things that is very neat about this tool is that, again, in real time, you can see just what the status is. So 85.3% is what the state of charge is on the bus right now, and that will slowly go down throughout the days it's used. Of other information is, it tells us how many miles are left remaining on that state of charge. So 162, and then the other component is time. So there's about 14 hours left that bus can be in service. To your right, you see a couple analytics. One is the speed of the bus, and if that bus starts moving, you'll see the speed go up. The other most important one is the power. So how much power is the bus consuming right now? And because it is essentially idling, it's only consuming 2 kilowatts. If the bus starts moving, you will see that as more speed is needed, that will go up because more power is being consumed, but you also see that it sometimes goes negative. So in my previous presentations with hybrid electric buses, I've spoken about regenerative braking, and what that does is that the kinetic energy that otherwise would have been lost through braking or just slowing the bus down, these buses are able to recapture that energy, store it, put it back up in the batteries to be used. So we are seeing regeneration rates at 30%. So let me simplify that. Basically what that means is if the bus consumes 100 kilowatts, that through regeneration, we're able to recapture 30% of that. So 30 kilowatts is recaptured just through braking and the bus slowing down. So we're actually extending the range a little bit. Because these are electric buses, we have a different way of saying what its efficiency is. It's in kilowatts hours per mile. And you can see that right there, currently, it is sitting at 1.1 kilowatts per mile. That's instant efficiency. Now, if you were to translate that to a metric we understand, which is MPG, miles per gallon, that would be about 19.2 miles per gallon equivalent. So there's a lot of different reports that we can run on this tool. It also allows us to see if there's any diagnostic messages. So far there's none. I can say that this bus, this particular one, has 5,600 miles on the odometer, and it has been completely trouble-free. There have been no runnability or operational or mechanical issues with this bus so far. And the other bus has also been issue-free. So that's kind of just a quick overview of the types of tools that we have at our disposal to keep up on the performance of the electric buses.
Okay, questions? Yeah, Commissioner Eggers.
Well, first of all, it's nice to know that if you put me on there as a driver, that we have a lot stronger braking and more power regeneration. Pretty good. Not that I get accused of that from my wife. You're stopping too suddenly. Slow down and stop. But if you do more, it would seem to generate. Anyway, I know we have financial issues at PSTA, and we're forecasting that through 2022, some really serious things. And what I think we had talked about before was that electric buses, one of the attractions to them was their operating costs were lower than other buses. And I think that's an important point to keep focusing on, because in theory, if we didn't have the capital side and we were getting our operating costs in line, we'd be okay. So I think that's significant, and that's a positive. I guess the question I would have, just to make sure I'm hearing correctly, that we're going to put $1 million into this and get 2 buses?
Yes, for this.
And if we were to go buy the diesel buses, we would get 2 buses for the same $1 million, roughly.
It'd
So it's-
probably be a little bit more than that. We're basically spending about, was it $450,000 on each bus
Yeah.
here? And it would cost us a little over, I know it would cost us over $500,000 with all of our bells and whistles on there for a
Okay.
diesel bus.
So it'd even be more.
For 2 buses, it's 1.9.
Right.
So-
But our portion of it's only
Our portion's
900.
only 900.
So we're actually saving
That's
a little
good.
bit on
And
the
that's
bus.
kind of what I was driving at more than anything, is that it seems like when we get these 2-for-1s, it becomes, from a capital standpoint, pretty close or even maybe favorable. So I think that's all good, and I just continue to keep a close eye on the safety aspects that we've learned a little bit about, and maybe at some point you can clue us in on how that's going, and how your team's adjusting to that method of that kind of bus. So other than that, I'm supportive.
Okay, any other questions?
Henry computed last night,
Pardon me?
that so far, we've already saved, what, $3,400 on
On fuel.
diesel fuel that
Yeah.
Mike had not budgeted for?
Yeah.
So-
Not to mention the
really good.
ecological advantages of it. But, what's the amount of reserve that we have to have when, to send this back to the yard, so that we have enough energy left to get it back to the yard and get it fully charged for the next day?
Good question. So we've been slowly exercising the bus. When we first got it, we put it out there for 4 hours. 4 became 6, became 8. Typically, right now, what we're seeing is that on average, the bus is doing 110 miles per day, and it is coming back here at about 50% state of charge. So
Okay.
I would suspect, and Commissioner Shulman asked me, are we seeing any impact, obviously with it getting warmer, with the air conditioning systems, and as it gets warmer, we've not seen any decline on that. Certainly, there's a big difference between 80 degrees and 110 degrees. Luckily for us, as I mentioned to Commissioner Shulman earlier, that AC systems actually consume less energy overall than, say, if we needed to use heat, if we were in colder climates. So that's what's going for us.
Right.
So after 8 hours, 110 miles, it's coming back about half full. We could probably put it out there. Our goal is to eventually leave probably around 15% state of charge before and still leave enough to come back to the yard. What that shows you in real time, but if I was to switch to a different menu, the other question I get asked is, well, what is the overall range? And right now we're seeing estimations at 190 miles or 15 hours. So it's actually getting better.
Okay. What's the amount of time that a normal bus, a diesel or diesel electric bus, would spend on that route on a daily basis?
It would be out there all day. Typically,
So-
the benchmark,
Yeah, so 15 hours, 18 hours?
probably closer to 20. The benchmark with a traditional fueled vehicle is about 350 miles. That's what a tank of fuel will get you, either diesel or CNG.
How many gallons is that?
125.
Okay.
Probably more closer to 110 usable.
Mm.
So I guess the next question then is, when are we going to consider going, if we've kind of had them go through their trial run, when are we going to put them on a regular route and see how they perform, elsewhere?
The DC circulator is a regular route for
I
us.
understand, but it's relatively short.
Right. We do have plans to take the second bus and deploy it out in other parts of the county to just
Uh-huh.
see what longer.
Nothing else,
runs-
it's great advertising.
Right.
You know, we put a good wrap on it, you know, that kind of
Right.
thing.
We're studying a bunch of different routes where the electric bus would perform well.
Mhm.
Fortunately for us here in Florida, is that we don't have a lot of hills.
Mhm.
And that obviously can be a severe power drain if you have to pull large hills.
Okay.
So we have a lot of good things going for us in Florida with electric buses.
Okay, cool. Anybody else have questions? I didn't mean to monopolize. Yeah, Commissioner Schulman.
So you talked about the range and time, but we still don't have the inline chargers installed. So, one, do we know what the timetable is for the inline chargers and how that will affect the overall range?
So the inline charger, well, we have one, we'll be getting one en route charger. That one we're working to install up here at our lay-by. We have design plans right now, we're at about 90%, and my hope is that we break ground this summer. And it should probably take about a month to install. And because our lay-by, which is out front on our campus, represents a midpoint in the county, a natural midpoint, then the theoretical range, obviously, if it has a point to charge en route, will increase. So our goal is that the bus can stay out there all day.
So the charger, though, that there's supposed to be one installed in St. Pete, what's the time frame for that install?
You know, after studying the St. Pete installation and just how well that the buses are doing now, we've refocused this charger to be installed outside our campus because it just makes a little bit more sense to provide, again, a midpoint for the county for these buses to just go all over it. Rather
We
than-
don't need to put that one in St. Pete.
Okay, so I thought we had money set aside for two. Was it just one?
Just one.
Just one, so you're saying the one that was gonna go in downtown St. Pete,
It's gonna go right here.
by the USF, is gonna go here.
Yes.
Does it make sense to get through a summer season with the electric buses running, on their current routes? To see what AC and usage, would look like in a tougher condition before we move forward on actually placing those chargers in the ground? I guess what my concern is do we find out that it should have really been in St. Pete because the electric usage and draw wound up being more, and thereby we're now bringing that bus back, earlier than we intended?
We're studying that data. The way that the DC circulator route is structured is, we have two buses now, so what happens is the first one goes out, and during a normal driver change, after 8 hours, the other one goes out. So they just flop. They just flip. If we put the electric charger downtown, at least initially, okay, that's about 20 miles away from us. So that limits the other electric buses that we'll have from having an opportunity to charge closer to our campus, one, but two, more or less as a midpoint to the county. So if we were to take an electric bus and send it all the way up to Tarpon Springs, then the only way it could charge would be back here, but with our depot chargers out back. So the en route charger allows more buses to interconnect and be used throughout the county.
And I understand that, but, and I realize this is off topic for this particular purchase, but it goes to having more of these electric buses on the road and how we, fuel them. Doesn't it make more, in my mind, it makes more sense to have a depot charger that's accessible on this campus, because we can control it better than if, you wouldn't put a depot charger downtown St. Pete, and have the en route in areas where we don't have that sort of control over the
Right.
equipment.
The other thing I'll add to that is, and I've often said this before, which is the battery technology is changing rapidly. So the battery that we are buying today will probably not be the battery 1 year, 2 year, 4 years from now. ultimately, the goal of all of the bus manufacturers with electric buses is that you don't need a charger en route anymore. And as I kind of mentioned before, we've seen our range actually get better, our estimated range get better as the bus is being used. So, I don't think that it's far off to say that within 3 or 5 years that we could see electric buses doing the equivalent of what a traditional fuel bus would be. That's the goal of all the OEMs. So I think, at least initially, having the depot charger or the en route charger up here at our lay-by just provides more short-term access to put these buses out in more parts of the county. Whereas if it was downtown, it just limits to what is downtown.
The location for the en route charger in St. Petersburg by USF would only service the looper. If we put it here, it has the flexibility of serving 5 or 6 routes already throughout the whole county. And we also ran into a lot of legal problems with the city of St. Petersburg in getting access to that. This one, this is new technology where it's en route. It's a manhole in the ground. It'll just be much easier for us to implement it on our own property. We can test it, and it'll be more flexible for many more routes. And plus, the success so far with the looper, we're not even close to having a problem. I mean, we have to look at the summer and maybe is that a 50% charge at the end of their run? They'll have 20, but we feel we don't need it.
Is there, I apologize, I'm taking the conversation past this action item, so we'll talk about charging stations.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, all right. So do we need a,
I have.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
No,
Sorry.
it's all right, because I thought there was a couple of other
Okay.
questions. I was going
That's
to wait
right.
for them.
Commissioner Eggers, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad you spoke, the last thing you said, which is the flexibility, I would, if we didn't have a meeting that didn't happen, I think I'd
Yeah.
miss it. So I'm glad that's that Viking
Yeah.
call.
Sorry, guys.
The route, I'm going to call it route power, where we get more distance out of that bus, it needs to be comparable to the regular buses that we're using. So it's good to hear that in 3 to 5 years, you feel pretty good that the buses that go out will have that same ability of another bus. Otherwise, you're cutting into our route power, our mileage that we need
range.
to cover. So, range, exactly. So I think that's a good point. And I'm glad that you all are thinking countywide, and with all due respect, not just downtown St. Petersburg. The mayor always wants things for downtown St. Petersburg, but this is countywide, and I do think it really brings a lot of flexibility to that. So, so you don't have any. I guess the technology is still evolving on that the rechargeability, how fast it recharges, and that kind of thing. So that's still a work in progress. Or
You mean charging here at the depot
Yeah,
or en route? Yeah, that's all.
So if you have 6 coming in at the end of the day, we have 1 charging station here?
We have 2 with the capability to do 2 at a time.
Okay, and how long does it take to totally charge? If it was completely drained, how long would it take to charge?
4 hours.
So that would be enough time to get them all?
In the middle of the night.
Okay.
Yeah, we're charging it, the chargers have a capacity of 80 kW. So right now, with the bus coming back at 50% state of charge, it's just about 2.
Yeah, it never goes all the way down to 0. I
It
guess,
can't,
yeah, so-
it can't.
yeah.
It basically will send off a bunch of buzzers and bells
Okay.
that'll annoy you at 10%.
Okay, and how about the other station? How long does it take to charge? Is it the same time to charge a bus, or is it a little slower charging than the?
Actually, it's a little faster.
Oh, is it?
So what we call, and you hear a lot of terms. One is en route charger, because that's what it is. It's way from- The other term you may hear be mentioned is what is called opportunity charging, because that's exactly what it is. When the bus comes in for a layover, it's an opportunity to charge. So that one out there will be a 250 kW inductive wireless charger. So all of our buses have receiver plates underneath them, and the manhole, as we call it, will be positioned in the concrete. So the idea is that when a bus does a round trip, whatever it is, okay, that the inductive charger returns to the bus what it used on that round trip so that you don't incur what we call a charge deficit. So slowly, you want to keep it, if it goes into service at 80% and it does a round trip, that the 2 or 3% that it consumed doing the round trip is returned back to the bus, so there's a net zero. It could actually return a lot more than the 2 to 3%, so actually you gain charge. With an inductive wireless charger, obviously there's no moving parts, there's no physical connections that have to be made, and the transfer rate is right around 96%. So there's not that much of a loss in efficiency due to the air gap between the bus plate and the plate in the concrete.
And with this, the last question, I guess this is for another day too, probably, is
Okay.
that with the move towards more hybrids and electrics, I'm assuming around the country, that how's that affecting the prices of the diesel, the standard diesel? I mean, normally you talk about 450. Do you see those prices going down, or do you just see them eventually phasing them out, or what do you see?
Well, in addition to normal inflation, no matter what you buy, so $500,000 bus is actually probably closer to $6 these days. On the reverse, yes, 10 years ago when I saw the first electric bus, it was probably $1 million. Now it's getting closer to the $780,000 range. So the incremental cost over the hybrids we're buying is not that dramatic, and yet the gap is closing.
I think that's something we just have to keep an eye on.
It's marketability.
Yeah.
As more people are interested in electric buses, obviously that will drive the cost down through normal economics.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Schulman.
Just one follow-up comment,
Sure.
I wasn't necessarily saying that it should be in St. Pete. This was the first time I was hearing of the change of location.
I just never let a St. Pete comment go.
I know, which is why I never let a rebut to a St. Pete comment go. So I just wanted to understand what it caused, what it precipitated the change in location, especially then since we haven't had a full year's operating understanding of the bus and making sure that it's still going to operate the way we intended. So.
Can I rebut the rebut?
No, it's not
I'm
allowed.
kidding, I'm
Yeah,
kidding.
we're not the first company to do this. There's other companies out there, so we're not leading the fleet necessarily here with this particular
No,
thing.
that's-
We've got
Had
some.
4 buses, we're not.
Yeah.
We have 2 operational.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, do we need, this is not an action item.
This is an action item.
No, we need a motion then?
We're going to make a motion to approve the electric bus program as presented by Henry.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously, thank you. And lastly, the maintenance contract.
Okay, so hopefully this action item is more mundane
Okay.
than the previous two. So, as you know, in a fleet maintenance operation, we use a lot of consumable supplies, nuts, bolts, fasteners. There's a name for that. We
Thank you,
call it
sir.
MRO
Let's go.
supplies. Currently, we're with a supplier called Fastenal. And we've been with them for quite a while. They're doing an excellent job. The state of Florida has a contract with Fastenal, so it has been competitively procured, and multiple agencies take part in it as a state contract. And they are an approved supplier with the state of Florida. So the action item is to approve a 20-month contract with Fastenal, and the 20 months is basically what is left on the state of Florida contract. So approval of a 20-month contract with Fastenal at a total not to exceed $324,000.
Move approval.
Okay,
Second.
all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That was easy, thank you.
I'm
All
assuming,
right,
I'm assuming the first 2 you're gonna put on the regular agenda, and the last
If
one.
we want to, we certainly can.
Well, no, I
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to, but
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
we'll probably get some questions about it, because it's an exciting concept. Yeah.
The electric bus part
Yes,
on the regular,
Yeah.
and the other 2 on the
Consent.
The dew power and the,
And that one.
Thank you.
Okay, service adjustments. Thanks.
Okay, good morning. So, we added this presentation to the agenda based on a lot of comments I've had during one-on-ones with a number of you and other board members, just having a lot of questions about the service adjustments that the board approved last month tentatively to go out and seek public comment on. And so this presentation is really trying to put that into context of where all the efforts that are underway right now to save money or look at additional revenue sources for public transportation in Pinellas County. And then the list that was approved by the board, how we came up with that list, and ways in which we're trying to mitigate or find other ways of saving so that the fewest number of riders are affected. And notice very heavily that I put Brad Miller and Heather Sobush on the title slide because I want to thank her. And any questions, you might have to ask her. So I've shared this list with a number of you, and I know it's kind of small, but there's a lot of work being done, not just by PSTA, but by Forward Pinellas, and we have Whit Blanton back there, and Pinellas County, ever since the January workshop that we at Forward Pinellas put on at the Seminole St. Pete College campus, and I think almost all of you were there, to look at every possible idea on saving money or identifying additional revenue sources, to invest in transportation in Pinellas County. I put two little green check marks by the top two items because those are the two items that I'm presenting on today. Doesn't mean that they're solutions. They're just that we're doing a due diligence. We're going to go through all of it. We are working on all of these items on the left-hand column there. Commissioner Bennett and I went to Tallahassee last week, and I think Commissioner Cox and I are going in April back to Tallahassee to look at some of these legislative initiatives, talk to the senators and representatives about that, the bed tax. We have a meeting with the Pinellas County School Administrator next week. There's been lots of discussions at Forward Pinellas even as of last week, and we're putting together sort of a presentation, or Cassandra's kind of taking the lead on putting together some of the analysis of if funding is identified, but it can only be spent on capital, like Penny for Pinellas, or the tourist development bed tax, or federal STP, how that benefits PSTA, public transit, or how that could be used versus operating expenses, operating funding, which is essentially gas tax or sales tax, or maybe there's other kinds of funding. So a lot of work is being done this month. I had a really good meeting with the new county executive, Barry Burden, with Whit, and I met, and we agreed to meet again sort of once a lot of this work is done. I think Forward Pinellas, as you know, is taking the lead on the Advantage Pinellas plan and putting that together, which is really the phasing plan. I think Commissioner Eggers, you've talked about that as a key component, like what would be the order for, say, new revenue. If new revenue was identified, how would we phase that in at different levels? And that will be all part of the Advantage Pinellas plan that ultimately will be approved by the MPO. And then Administrator Burton talked about having a Pinellas County Commission workshop on transportation funding globally, not just transit, in late March or April. So lots of things are in the works. I'm not sure. I think there will be I'm not sure of the timeline on all of it. What I'm hopeful for is for a few things to happen by June, so that we would not have to implement major service reductions at PSTA to have a balanced budget. But there will be a vote by PSTA board on some level of service adjustments. Hopefully there'll be a vote by the county commission on transportation revenue sometime before. Then Fort Pinellas will have a vote approximately by then. I think this is right, Whit, on, this is more long-term, but they set priorities. The Fort Pinellas votes on priorities, and that can affect down the road what FDOT might program in their work program and other, especially the STP dollars and things like that by sometime in June. So all the transportation entities in Pinellas County will be taking some action, and of course the state legislature will conclude by then too. So why did the PSTA board vote on a tentative list of service adjustments last month? Well, it started, this path that we're on started really crystallizing last year with some really challenging trends that we started identifying, and really we've had a lot of discussions at this finance committee about. DART ridership, that's our service for people with disabilities. Ridership keeps growing. It grew again to another record this month. It keeps going up and up and up. And DART is different than any other kind of service that we provide. If a new person rides the regular PSTA bus, that's awesome. That generates revenue for us if they pay, and it does not cost PSTA any more than we already have budgeted, right? They're just filling a seat on an already paid for vehicle. Every time a new person signs up for DART, that's $22 or $32 new ride, and they usually ride up and back, so it's close to $70 a day every time somebody new signs up for DART, and it just keeps growing. And we started noticing that. Of course, we've noticed for a long time about health insurance. This booming economy has been great for ad valorem revenues, but it's also been a real challenge in hiring employees. And the buses still have to go out. So our overtime expenses were starting to really grow way over our what we had budgeted, because there weren't drivers on the staff and so other people had to fill in at over a time and a half. We've made some real progress with that with our new union contract, and we are, the staff is doing a great job in really trying to fill and hire people to reduce overtime. Despite all those sort of gloomy trends last year, we finished with a surplus. The staff did a great job in mitigating expenses in all areas of the organization, so we ended up the year with more revenue than expenses. But then you fast forward to the current year, which we projected that revenue was not going to keep up with the expense level in fiscal year 19, the year we're in now, and now we're about halfway through the year, and that appears to be, we're right on trend to where we thought we would be, where we would, revenues would be $1.7 million less than our projected $81 million in expenditure. Now, the reason that I recommended this type of budget last year, and the board approved this, was one, these trends, I knew we couldn't solve these in just a month or just wave our wand and fix them. We needed some time to look into the different options, which we are doing, I'm thankful, right now. And number two is PSTA's financial health is so strong. We have $25 million in unrestricted reserves in the bank, and that's on top of our insurance reserve. That's on top of our 2-month rainy day reserve, and most of that $25 million isn't even allocated to any kind of capital project. It's the money we added last year and in years past. So we are very financially healthy as we sit here today. And my thought is making draconian cuts in the service while we're sitting on such a large amount of funding wasn't appropriate. And we needed some time to come up with a balanced solution on these service adjustments. And we could do that in fiscal year 2019 while still working very hard to try to close the gap. And the staff is working amazingly well at trying to do that. We've got a lot of focus at our agency on finding any possible way to save money. We've added to our balanced scorecard, which kind of drives all of our organization and governs our performance evaluations, a specific line item to reduce the budget gap. We have teams of employees coming up with totally insane ideas on saving money that we're giving awards to for their craziness because it shows creativity. And we're looking for any possible way. Now, it is kind of like this, our job. It is proven very, very challenging because of things that I think the Finance Committee, you know. This is a chart from our benchmarking group that we participate in. We constantly compare ourselves to 25 other transit systems across the United States, mid-sized, mostly systems like we are. And you can see that we are down here at the lowest cost per hour compared to any of our peers in the transit world. That the efficiency of our organization already is incredibly efficient. And then when you delve further and you look at just the administrative costs, how do we compare on, can we find savings that don't affect the service? It's really hard. It's really hard to do that in a meaningful way because we're already so low. And what I like about this, or what I note about this, is that each of these little lines are the last 7 years. And you can see that ours has stayed relatively flat. Our administrative cost per hour of bus service we put out there, unlike some of these others that are really growing. Despite those challenges, we are up to a challenge. Debbie and I and the rest of the staff are working hard. We've identified some ways in which we might trim the administrative budget. Number one is that issue with overtime. We think we have stemmed the incredible growth in overtime with a really hard effort at hiring and training new operators. And we're closer to filling our ranks than we have been, thanks to Trish and the training staff, constantly training new employees. And so we think that's $100,000 at least avoided cost that we would otherwise have. As you might know, we have a really innovative program that we got a federal grant for to introduce real-time paratransit, real-time Lyft or taxi rides for our DART customers. And if they ride Lyft or even United Taxi instead of Care Ride, that saves us money. And that program really just kicked off January 1st. We're starting to get meaningful numbers of people that are actually taking trips now like that. So I think that's actually going to lead to some savings as that program grows. We're going to build the federal grants more for capital, for staff time related to capital projects. As you know, with our scorecard, we now do surveys. We contract out for a number of different surveys of the employees, of a phone survey of non-rider taxpayers and of the riders, and we're proposing to do that every other year. Do those surveys on a every other year basis rather than every year, and that'll save us $50K. And then we're going to have to look at our compensation levels or compensation increase levels for our admin employees moving forward. About 70% of our costs we are baked in, and that's in our union contract and our employees governed by the collective bargaining agreements. So the only impact that we can have on a year-by-year basis is really on the non-union employees. So this is the list that the board approved last month of services that we would adjust tentatively, perhaps as early as this coming June. I think there was a lot of questions about why or how we included DART, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. DART is a restriction in the area of Pinellas County that we provide DART service to is on the list. The connector route of the Safety Harbor connector is on the list, and two routes, a route in St. Petersburg. There's 3 routes in St. Petersburg: 22nd Avenue North, part of Route 5, not all of Route 5, and part of Route 16, but not all of it. And then Route 58, which is in the middle of the county on Bryan Dairy Road, but also is the service that services the St. Pete College Seminole campus. These routes would not be on the list if they had a lot of riders. These are relatively, compared to the rest of our system, low ridership route. However, I will note that a couple years ago, we eliminated the sort of historically low ridership route, Route 444 in Pinellas Park, that had a subsidy per passenger of over $45 a trip. None of these compare. These are all twice as good at that route. Even the Safety Harbor one, which is low ridership, is significantly better than that. And then when you get down toward the bottom of these, you're getting into like the $2, $2.50 subsidy per trip type service. So we're not talking terrible service. They're just very low compared to the rest of our services.
Question for you. How does ridership, could you explain to me how the ridership, the number of riders, has anything to do with the DART service? DART service to me seems to be more demand oriented, so that wherever you are in the county and you need that service, you call on it and it comes to you.
Correct.
From wherever they dispatch. It's not like it's a regular route that they're doing and there's low ridership. It's just they're here and they get a call, they go and they take them, that kind of thing.
Well, okay, that's true. Each vehicle generally carries 1 passenger at a time,
Right.
sometimes 2. But we do track the ridership, the aggregate ridership on a daily or monthly basis on that. It just is representative of a vehicle is dispatched for every single one of those 32,000 monthly rides.
But it really doesn't have any bearing on where it goes. It just goes to wherever it's called.
Right.
So it's not ridership driven in terms of ridership, one ridership route being more attractive than another ridership route.
Oh, right. Well, right. Although we have tried, it's not really apples to apples, exactly as you say, because it's demand response. We go to wherever they are, but we put it on this list in comparison based on its aggregate, the impacts that we believe will have to these adjustments compared to the other ones, and the number of people that will be impacted.
Because when I'm again, the end game here, it's not necessary, this is real serious stuff, so I'm not saying I'm calling it a game for any other reason, but the end game is to be able to convince our folks that live in this county that transit's not only important to our kids and grandkids, but to people today. And there's value today to some degree. And there's 250,000 people that live in North County. They get very little service. And yet they continue to pay the tax for PSTA. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose them, other than the little bit of the routes that go up the coastline, because that's a specific tourism quote based route.
Yeah.
Not completely, but that we don't lose sight of that in providing service, especially for folks that may be handicapped that need that help. And I'm specifically speaking to some folks, a person or two, that live up in North County and need DART transportation services and are now being phased out. And the alternative for them apparently isn't very attractive. They certainly don't have bus alternatives. And there might be Lyft or Uber, but I think we need to talk about that too, because they look at those routes up there the same way that we do with our buses. And it's not very attractive to be up there. And so
Yeah.
even for them to be called to go do a service like that is discouraging for a driver. So I think we need to think about that too, that we have to have some service available for especially handicapped folks in North County, period. So I just want to make sure that that's factored into this conversation, and that it is demand driven, not a regular bus route. It's different, in my opinion.
It is different. You're exactly right. The definition of DART is PSTA's way of meeting the Americans with Disabilities Act, where we are required to provide certain levels of paratransit service for people with disabilities who cannot ride the fixed route service. I mean, that's the definition of what we have to do. We have to provide an alternative for people that cannot ride the regular bus. We only need to provide that within 3/4 of a mile of the fixed route bus. So DART, the purpose of DART is not to serve the whole, I mean, the legal purpose of it is not to serve all of Pinellas County residents. It is to provide an alternative to the bus, to the buses that we operate. So if there is no route, we are not obligated. We might want to, and we do want to, but we are not obligated to provide a paratransit ride where there is no alternative, where there is no fixed route bus as an organization.
And that's a great point, Brad. I think there's two different points there in that statement you made. The first one is that perhaps where our buses go now, we're not required to provide that service. We're required to provide that service where our buses go now to those people who can't use the buses. And that needs to be looked at to make sure that we're tight on that. Because I'm sure that some folks that are using the DART service perhaps otherwise could use the bus service.
Yes.
And that's an area that needs to be looked at. But the second point is, we may not legally be required to do the second part, which is to go areas where we don't have buses. But perhaps the right thing to do is even more important in that situation where those folks don't have an option.
Right. Oh.
I mean, I think those are two different, and I know you're kind of separating it that way, but the point is that, we have to take
Yeah.
care of it.
You want to answer that?
DART service started. DART service did. Yes. I just wanted to respond to that, Commissioner.
Okay.
Ayers. DART service started before the Americans with Disabilities Act was enacted in 1982. It actually started in St. Petersburg in the 1970s, and historically, it has served all of Pinellas County. I mean, ever since the 1970s, or when it was expanded in the 1980s, it has served all areas of Pinellas County, regardless of where the routes are.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the 3/4 mile, somebody lives beyond that, they're not eligible for DART service, essentially. But have we not extended that? I believe it's being at like 1.5 miles right now.
A mile and a half on each route, on each corridor, I mean, each side?
Yeah. From
Well, I mean, really, we service, right now, we will pick up people up almost everywhere in Pinellas County.
Mhm.
I mean, we will qualify a resident for DART service in anywhere,
Well,
not just the 1.5 miles.
Uh,
But you're right, that would be beyond what the legal
I would think
requirement
to
is.
stick with the 3/4 mile fixed route is,
Okay.
the way we should go.
Commissioner Bennett, comment?
Brad, could you just quickly explain to us how we get paid for that?
Right, so.
A DART passenger that gets on a DART doesn't pay for the DART, doesn't pay for the ride. Somehow we get reimbursed.
Right, so the way PSTA meets its obligations to provide this service is by contracting out the rides to a company called CareRide. And we pay roughly an average of $22 or $23 for every ride. PSTA taxpayers pay the $22. The ad valorem property tax pays that. The customer pays $4.50. The customer who rides pays $4.50, and that's also governed by the federal government. The federal government says that we are not allowed to charge more than twice the base fare of our regular bus system. Again, DART is a service that is oriented around the bus. It is connected to the regular bus system. The federal government says you can only charge twice the fare, even though it costs 10 times the price to us. $4.50 is what we charge. Customers pay $4.50 to ride DART. That leads to a lot of the issues of ways in which we might try to solve this problem. Number one is this state legislative fix to Medicaid dumping. What we believe and what Care Right folks have identified for us and what has been shown on TV as a big problem all across Florida and especially in the Tampa Bay area is that there are lots of Medicaid trips to the doctor by Medicaid recipients that should be paid for by Medicaid and not DART. Should be paid for by Medicaid that are not. That this service is so bad that is offered by the brokerage system that the state has set up for providing free Medicaid-funded transportation to and from the doctor for recipients, that those recipients or their care network has given up on the taxis and other things that the brokers that are in Tallahassee or I don't even know whether they're national companies, they can't get the rides, and so they just call DART. They give up on the free Medicaid-funded transportation, and they would just rather pay the $4.50. And we have identified that this is possibly this is $1 million. This is $1 million of that we are paying for largely instead of Medicaid. And Mr. Bennett and I and Patty Johnson were up in Tallahassee and we'll be there again talking about this issue. Senator Brandis is very focused on this from Pinellas County. He has an idea. He's got a bill, of course, it's probably not surprising to any of you. His is a bill that would have Uber and Lyft provide rides for Medicaid recipients instead of the vehicles that they have now, which would help because that would give people more Medicaid recipients options rather than DART, if they could just hail an Uber and get that paid for. I have a meeting coming up next week with the head of the secretary over Medicaid for the state. She's coming to St. Petersburg, and we're going to meet with her and talk to her about this. They're very these private companies that the state has brokered with for the transportation are very hard to get any kind of data from or understand. We don't know other than we see people coming on to PSTA, but we're not even aware that they even acknowledge the problem. They obviously think it's a good thing if they don't have to provide the rides because they make more money. So that's one thing we're working on. I think we have some progress in that with Senator Brandis's bill, the meetings. I think we can make some headway on that we can bill Medicaid for the trips that we provide if they won't be provided elsewhere. There's lots of options, like Commissioner Eggers, you were just mentioning, that we could make changes to the eligibility for DART customers. One thing we're looking at is, can we really increase our scrutiny on new DART customers so that we make better sure that they cannot ride the regular fixed route bus? And there's lots of things that transit systems, including in our benchmarking group, do that we don't do. We've never done that. In Pinellas County, DART has been one of the most open paratransit systems in the US. If you get a doctor to write a letter saying you need DART, boom, here's the care ride number, and then you can ride unlimited numbers of times at $32 a trip. You can get basically a personal limousine service, because care ride is so awesome. They love it. Right to your door that we pay for. Now maybe that needs to change. Maybe since the folks rely on it, maybe that should only change for new riders. Maybe we should grandfather in all existing customers, and then just implement it on new trips. Another idea is maybe the rides should be conditional. That if Brad is a DART customer but lives right out, there's a bus stop right outside of my house, and the bus goes right to the doctor's appointment that I have today, and it's got a sidewalk and it's very accessible, that I would not be approved for that trip because I could just take the bus. But if I went to someplace else that was not accessible, then I could get a DART ride. That's what conditional approvals are. Now I put a little dollar sign there because that's a new system where we would have to do a GPS analysis of every trip to see if the sidewalk was there and see if the bus stop and how it would all work, that we're not set up to do now. But lots of systems do that, and that would save us money. We could implement what's called a functional assessment. It's just another way to make sure that the folks can't ride the regular bus. We would interview, we'd have the DART applicant to be eligible for DART come to PSTA and be interviewed. And we would send them through sort of an obstacle course of how to ride the bus to see if they could navigate riding the fixed route bus. So lots of systems say they make them go up ramps and get onto a bus and pay the fare and say you have to figure out the schedule. How would you get to a McDonald's, a hypothetical, and back? See if they can cognitively do that. And if they can't, then they are eligible for DART. But if they can, then they ride the fixed route bus. You know, it's really none of these issues are going to be loved by our customers. You know, we have some awesome track members that ride DART and proudly say that they also ride the bus. And I love them dearly. I don't want that to be different. In fact, it saves us money every time they ride the fixed route bus instead of ride care ride. But it's technically not supposed to be like that. You're not supposed to be able to ride both DART and the fixed route bus. We know lots of people can. We make it free for DART customers to ride the regular fixed route bus, just to give them options other than spending the $22 a ride. So we're watching, obviously, the DART budget every single month. We've seen we're within budget right now on DART. So the things are, I think, looking much better. Looking better in this, that we can maybe have some ways of mitigating these costs in the future on DART. There will be an option in all parts of the county. Now, as the constituents up in North Pinellas said, it's not awesome, but it is an option. We have our Direct Connect program, and if you look at the ridership on it, it just keeps growing and growing, that you can get a $5 discount to access the fixed route service from any parts of the county, even if it's really far away, by taking an Uber or a taxi or a care ride. And that service will still be there. That's obviously much less costly to PSTA, and it's more costly to the customer than $4.50. Our subsidy is only $5, and the customer's ride is whatever it costs beyond that. My last slide, getting more complicated because you guys are experts. So the list of services that we have approved, and we haven't gone out for public comment yet. We probably won't go out for any kind of illicit public comment in a big way for probably another month or so, as we keep doing this due diligence. This, on the left-hand side, is the list of routes that the board approved last month to look at adjusting. The next column over is if you just look at the lowest ridership routes in our system, aggregate lowest ridership routes, you get a different list. And the black ones are not on the list, not on the list. The Route 813 Dunedin Connector is the lowest ridership route in our system, but it's not on the list to get public comment because it's grant funded. It's funded by FDOT, mostly. So if we eliminated it, we wouldn't save any money. Same thing with the Oldsmar-Tampa connector. Now these are the 3 North County connectors that have low ridership compared to the other systems, but they were never designed. We knew they would never have very high ridership. They are route deviation services, and they're about meeting the expectations of what we thought the ridership would be on them when they launched.
Are we using the smaller buses on those routes?
Yes.
And I have seen the new ones out there.
Yeah.
It's a different conversation. But
The Route 90 is a low ridership route because it only runs 2 times a day, but the buses are packed with workers going to the beach. And then you see on down the list. So then this column is lowest productivity, lowest rider per hour or per bus. How crowded are the vehicles? So you see the 90 is no longer on the list because it's low ridership, but that's just because it hardly has any service. The Route 13 Dunedin Connector, again, is up there, but it's grant funded. The 100 and 300X routes are grant funded in large part, but they're limited service. They are not very efficient because they have large stretches of the Howard Franklin Bridge where they're not picking up any passengers. They're going over to Tampa, and they're mostly running with a closed door. That's why they are technically on the list. So then you get to really the right-hand column, which is really the closest to the list that we identified, which is the highest subsidy. If you net out grants that we have from FDOT, you get this list that you can see is very similar to the list that the board approved. But again, as I mentioned, none of these, not even the Safety Harbor route, is anything close to as high a subsidy per rider as we were doing on the Route 444 when we eliminated that a couple of years ago. And when you get down to these routes, the ridership is significant. And the subsidy is down in the $2 to $3 per trip range. You know, our fare is $2.25, so you're getting down there to close to 50% fare box recovery. So one thing we're talking to FDOT about is, can we move the grants that are supporting these lower ridership routes to higher ridership routes, not lose the revenue, and therefore adjust these routes rather than some of the other ones? Like, can we move the funding that is supporting that Dunedin connector to another service, and therefore fewer people are affected? And FDOT has said they're open to that. They're open to allowing us to shift the grants around. As we presented at the workshop, if we are able to identify about $5 million annually, that is our goal. That would allow us to make some of these adjustments to the connectors throughout 58 and 22, but we would have funding to reinvest in our highest ridership routes, our core routes, and would allow us to maintain our DART service. And we would not have to, we would be able to invest where we have more riders. Last, as I mentioned, we are looking at all possible options on revenues. My hope is that that process concludes in about a month, and then a county workshop, and then some votes by all the entities happen in April and May. And that's my presentation based on questions that I got that wasn't originally planned for the agenda, but I thought it was important.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, reports. Debbie?
Thank you. Going over the financial reports for the month and year-to-date, if you take a look at the month of December, we have some timing differences that we talked about last month, especially on the property tax, just when it comes in and when we've budgeted for it. And you'll see on the next page that it balances itself out. One of the areas I want to bring your attention to that we're working on right now is under the expense side. The third line down is called supplies expense. We had a vehicle that had a significant amount of damage that was done to it, just right up here by 118. It was hit by a dump truck. And we received funding from the insurance carriers to help pay for those repairs. The repairs were so extensive that really, as we started looking at this year, we can see that we're rebuilding the bus. So right now, these expenses are sitting on the operating side. We are going to be pushing that over into the capital side because we're rebuilding the bus back to the life it had when it was severely damaged at about 10 years, I believe. So you'll be seeing that coming off of the operating side and going on to the capital. And it's all the repairs are being funded by the insurance proceeds. So that will help us out. If you turn to the next page on a year-to-date basis, you can see that we have a surplus right now of the 24.7 million compared to 24.9. There's a $293,000 negative variance. Of that, $274,000 relates to this specific vehicle. Actually, it's more like about $300,000, $310,000, somewhere in that range. So will be, as Brad said in his presentation, the good news is we're on target to budget. The bad news is we're on target to budget, which means we're anticipating to lose 1.7 million, which is why staff is so focused on finding ways to negate that. Are there any questions on the data for December?
Questions? Okay.
If not, we have a host of quarterly reports that are in here. We have our capital projects reports, and I'll just give you a couple highlights. And in there, our Central Ave BRT is now the 30% design phase, so we're progressing along with that. We have new APCs, automatic passenger counters, that have been installed on all of our buses, and we're working on that for spring break for our Jolly Trolley buses that we use. And this is very important because the better and more accurate counts that we have on our buses will most likely lead us to get more federal funding because it'll be accurately recording all the ridership data. So this is one of those items where we've made an investment fully with federal funds, and we should be, as we go forward in the coming years, see an increase in our FTA funds as well. We've also received our 2019 buses, and we just paid for those as soon as the federal government came open for business. We ran that through because that was a $6.6 million item, and we were very much in fear of the federal government shutting it down again last week. Connector vehicles, we've got some of those on the road. So we're making progress in a lot of areas. Brad talked about the Sandbox project, which is our DART on demand, and we're seeing an increase in the number of participants in that. So those are some of the highlights that we have on all of our capital projects. We also have quarterly reports, and Michael, do you want want to touch on the investments
Sure.
and reserves, please?
So the investment balance at the end of December is about 66.7 million. That's grown considerably, you'll see from the last quarter, mostly due to the timing of the property tax receipts. We opened a new CD during the quarter and a third institution, so we have CDs at 3 institutions now, so we're continuing to encourage competition amongst the banks. That balance of 66.7 million you see carried over to the reserve report, which is made up of about 42.2 million as part of the 2 months operating reserve, the self-insurance reserves, and our capital reserves is of about 25.8 million. And the remaining balance is funds collected ahead of time through the property taxes that will be paid to expenses that we'll have throughout the remaining of the fiscal year.
Okay, questions?
Yeah, just to touch on fuel, since we had a good, robust discussion on electric buses. Our average price per gallon right now is $2.21 compared to our $2.30. When I'm looking out on the futures market right now, it's anywhere from around $2 to $2.03. We have to add on like a differential on top of that, so it'd be roughly around $2.15 to $2.18 compared to this year, $2.30. If we can lock in some of that for next year, starting now, we should be able to save some money. For the 15 cents per gallon, we approximately savings we might have, it'd be over $300,000 worth of annual savings that we would have to us. We're constantly keeping an eye on that as well. And we also have in here, we have kind of reports, our health insurance. And I'm wearing my Fitbit, I'm walking, we're good. But we've actually, I have quite a bit. I would love to tell you about health insurance, and I know we'll be talking more about that as we go through the budget process. And right now, we've seen an increase in the average cost per claim. And it's gone up to, the increase is about $189, or 21% increase in the cost of claims. And the basic reason for that is we've had some catastrophic claims in this first quarter, and including we actually had one member that accounted for approximately 68% of the cost for a 2-month period. The good news on this, I guess, if there is any, when I look at last year, because I was been able to, the data isn't in here, when I looked at fiscal 18 compared to the year before, we've seen a decrease in our medical cost claims of 6.6%. What we are seeing is an increase in the pharmacy costs, and that's where this is mostly being driven by. And we've seen about a 27.8% increase in the pharmacy costs, and only a small piece of that is due to inflation. 25% of that 27.8% relates to the cost of the drug mixes that they're using now. They're costing so much more money. We've also seen a decrease in our catastrophic claims, so that's good news. Catastrophic claim is anything over $50,000. The year before we had 35 catastrophic claims. In fiscal 18 we had 27 catastrophic claims. So the average cost that increased in the claims, even though the claims were down specifically due to pharmacy. So we're taking a look at everything as we're starting to enter into this year, and in looking what we'll do with our health insurance for this year as to how best to look at it. So we're keeping the eye on the ball there, and you'll be hearing plenty more in the coming months.
Questions? Are we retain, what's the amount we retain in those, on those costs, those catastrophic claim costs and
We have a limit on that, and I believe it's at $125,000, over which we then get reimbursed. So we have basically a self-insured retention on that of about $125,000.
okay, we had 27 of them?
We had 27 last year compared to 35 the year before.
Okay. So
I think we've had 13 so
when we come
far
up for
this year.
renewal this time, then we'll have to consider whether it's worthwhile to retain that or
Well,
or
we want to
retain
be able
more,
to keep
or-
that ceiling, to be able to, which is a good thing, so that we don't get charged over that. One of the things that we're looking at is, what would it be if we went back to fully insured?
Right.
What would it be if we stayed at the sort of the hybrid where we are now? And what would it be if we had the flexibility that it allows us with self-insurance?
Yeah.
I don't know if we're quite there yet, but we're constantly taking a look at it. And knowing that the pharmacy is the biggest cost to us, we'll be definitely looking further at that.
All right, any other questions? Okay. We've only got a couple of minutes. Is there anything else that we need to review, Brad?
I would just like to note, not for, trumpeting or a ribbon cutting event, but I would just like to note that we have had ridership increases 4 out of the last 5 months. Thanks to Hurricane Irma for one of those months, but we saw another ridership increase just on the regular buses, which is a good thing.
Good.
Yeah.
All right.
Also DART, which is maybe not as good.
Maybe not so good, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Meeting is adjourned, and we'll see you next month. If not sooner, we'll see you next week.
There you go.
That's what I think.
Thanks.
See you. Right. Yeah. So I don't think, Commissioner Lazar is attending.
I'm assuming.
So, are you the vice chair? Who's the vice chair? You are? Welcome, you're double duty.
Yeah, Jim, I can't.
Gonna pay us back.
Legal ones.